Yeah. Okay,
Great.
cool. So, kia ora and welcome to this New Zealand Federation of Socialist Societies online seminar entitled For What We Will, A Brief History of American Socialism. Before I introduce our speaker, Jason, I'll just say a few words about our organization quickly. So, the New Zealand Federation of Socialist Societies is a national body with three regional affiliates, largely independent from each other. Those are Canterbury, Otago, and Wellington Socialist Societies. And we're chiefly educational, though not exclusively educational, but that's certainly our main focus. And to that end, we host public lectures, panels, and online seminars like this one, as well as social events for all like-minded folks out there. We also publish the Commonweal. It's blurring. Here it is. It is a lovely Morris print.
Whenever it's not blurred, it looks great.
It does, yeah. And the seventh edition of which will be out in May. However, I should also just draw your attention to the fact that we've just today published a special edition via our Substack, which has solicited articles from various other organizations across the left here in Aotearoa on the question of what is to be done. So you can find out more about us, including finding that particular publication by going to socialistsocieties.org.nz. And all our affiliates have events coming up over April and May. So do look us up online on social media and try and come to one of our in-person events as well. So, Jason, I should have asked actually, how do I say your last name, Jason? Netek?
It's pronounced Netek, but Netek works because a lot of people say Netek. But if I say it that way, then I've gotten prescriptions back for like nettles and whatever. No one just says it right. So
Right.
Netek.
Netek. Jason Netek is a
Yeah.
longtime socialist activist and one of the hosts of the Regrettable Century podcast. And I must also mention that Jason and his co-hosts were gracious enough to have me and a few other Federation members on to talk about our project last year. So do check that out, but also check out the podcast in general because it really does focus on the fractures and decline of the left over the 20th century. So Jason is well placed to edify us on this topic today. So Jason's going to Jason's going to speak for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have time for Q&A after that. So I'll pass it over to you now, Jason. Please take it away.
Great, thank you. I'm setting my timer too for 30 minutes, and I'll try to stop before it goes meh, 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 but if it does, then I'll know I need to stop. Okay, so like I was saying, I had written this out long form, and it reads, I think sometimes it reads very well, but it would take an hour and 15 minutes very quickly. And even then, it's still just kind of begins to touch on the details. Also, I wanted to bring a stack of books to show everybody, like, this is the stuff, but really it's like 70 books over in this section on that shelf. So it's just too long. So just trust me. There's more detail in here than I'm going to get to. The last part is I would say that if you wanted to listen to a more detailed version of this, which is still less detailed than what I wrote, which is still less detailed than the whole history, there are two podcast episodes specifically about this. One is called The Tragedy of American Socialism, and one is called The Farce of American Socialism. And that should give you some indication as to what my general thesis is here, which is that basically there was a century-long, more or less, wave upward, followed by, and maybe we're still in a century-long sort of downwards wave, downwards slide. And the contention I want to make is that if there's going to be a positive redirection, a change in socialist fortunes to look more like the period, the upward slide that I'm calling the tragedy, it's going to be the result of a remarriage of socialism and the labor movement. And I think a lot of that's going to actually have to do with us learning from people like you, because I think that from what I can tell from the socialist societies of the kind that you're building, in some ways you're very far in advance of where we are. But in the past, in the century past, there are a lot of lessons we can learn. Um, so I guess the first thing I want to say is that and this makes more sense if you are an American, or if you're very old, or if you're a very old American, which is that socialism is as American as apple pie, which is to say it's not a foreign import, and to the degree that there are branches of kinds of socialism which have been attempts at importing a kind of foreign style, a foreign some inspirational thing like the Russian Revolution or the Chinese Revolution or something. Those are marks of the lack of a large popular base for socialism, um, which can be very easily a nationalist talking point. Um, my contention is that it doesn't need to be. It's only meant to be that you have to be able to, be propagandist enough to utilize what actually moves people. And this is going to change from country to country, even from region to region. So like in the eight, so really there's a long prehistory. It's like a couple of decades of the prehistory. Lots of utopian schemes. What we can call socialism is really at this point in the 1840s, in the 1850s and 60s, kind of more a matter of the heart. At best, it's like Quakers and sort of immigrants from Europe after the 1848 revolutions, many of whom become like officers in the Union Army, also bring along a lot of socialist ideas. And in fact, I think it's 1864. It's the American section of the International Workingmen's Association is founded, mostly by German immigrants. And at the time, there are like 5,000 members. And this is still in the prehistory. This is not yet a mass socialist expression. Although by our standards today, 5,000 would be an incredible number. Um, the but okay, so in 1868, um, the the General German Labor Association, which is also founded by German immigrants, mostly Lassalleans and Marxists. And if you know anything about the early history of the SPD, that will make some sense. It's basically two different wings of the people who try to use the state versus people who oppose the state and everything in between. And at the time, this is the second socialist party in the world. The first one being in Germany and the second one being in the US, which I think is little known actually in this country. But anyway, so we have some historical high points, which I want to talk about first. In the early years, which I'm going to call 1870 to 1900, you have the Workingmen's Party, which now is called the Socialist Labor Party. And it's founded in 1876. And within 1 year of it being founded, members of the Workingmen's Party find themselves at the helm of, in a lot of cases, in a lot of cities, as the leaders of the Great Railroad Strike, which is the first. It's like really, this is what I would call the coming out party of American socialism, of a revolutionary kind. So cities like St. Louis, and basically all up and down the Midwest, all the way down to like the northern part of the South. For a short time, socialists, well, really workers run the cities. General strike committees become a replacement for city governments, and a lot of members of the Workingmen's Party are actually elected to sort of staff this. And this, incidentally, is also, I think, the first really great missed opportunity, because at the time, and we'll find this all throughout our history, there's this kind of unease, kind of keeping the whole labor movement at arm's length, because even though socialism at this point and from this point forward is thought of as a workers' movement, the idea of the Workingmen's Party is helping run things on behalf of the working class as the organized toilers is sort of anathema to a lot of people, because it's seen as being substitutionist. So even if the workers pick you, for a lot of people, this was just more than I think that they could stomach. They couldn't reconcile this for themselves theoretically, and that meant what do I want to say here? It's whatever. It's a missed opportunity, and it's the first big lesson in having the audacity to just try something that's a little bit out of your comfort zone. The Great Railroad Strike is ultimately is broken up by the U.S. federal government. It takes federal troops and kind of a while and a lot of violence to put down. Um, the most recent global event in people's minds of a similar nature is the Paris Commune in 1871. So a lot of newspapers in 1877 are talking about the coming of the communist revolution to the United States, and it's overblown, it's very panicked. But I think that this should give some kind of an indication as to just how serious this very first expression of this mass popular democratic proletarian socialism was. I didn't write down the number for how many members of the Working Men's Party there was, but I did. So the IWA, the First International, had 5,000 members, and I did not consider them to be a mass party. And the Working Men's Party, I did. So if I was doing my well, whatever, if I had my long text, I would probably know the number. But it's a huge party for a while. Um, they later changed their name to the Socialist Labor Party, actually within a year, by 1878. And it's still largely kind of German speaking. It's still mostly for German immigrants, mostly in a couple of cities. Like they're really big in New York and they're really big in Missouri and a few other places. But it's not yet really a mass popular party. And they have this relationship with the unions, which is very, very hostile because they see them as either something for the workers to have, that's for them over there, or they want to take it over, depending on which faction you are. The Working Men's Party ends up splitting into two, and one party, which keeps the name Socialist Labor Party, is led by Daniel De Leon, and he is sectarian extraordinaire. He's kind of the term for people like him is impossibilist. That's the term that was used at the time. These impossibilists who, no matter what happens, they always imagine it as being better. They're very purist in a way which is immediately they cease. They have no relevance, and they kind of very quickly kind of fade from view, even though the Socialist Labor Party still exists. The other section, I'm going to skip over all the details here, but this merges with a group called the Social Democratic Party of America, which is a split out of the Social Democracy of America. And that's where the Eugene Debs comes from. And this merger forms the Socialist Party of America in 1900. And that, I think, that's when I could say we finally arrived at the beginning of mass American socialism. That's where because the United States at the time is a country that is made up of different immigrant groups, very ghettoized. And the old Working Men's Party and Socialist Labor Party, they're very happy, they're okay with this, they're very comfortable. So they're a German-speaking party, and it's a party for German immigrants, which means that if you are an Italian immigrant or if you're not an immigrant, it's just not a party for you. Whereas the Socialist Party of America is an English-speaking party, which really matters at the time because it helps there's a lingua franca in the party so that no matter where you go, everybody speaks the same language more or less. So that's a big part of, I think, how the Socialist Party begins to matter. And I have, okay, I'm going to have to go a lot quicker than this. This is, okay, anyway, so this is the golden age of socialism. Very quickly, the Socialist Party grows from strength to strength. And by 1912, so within the first 12 years of its founding, Eugene Debs, who is already a popular labor leader basically from the days of the Pullman strike, he gets 1 million votes. And this is at a time whenever women can't vote. Black people in the South can't vote. And itinerant workers or workers without a fixed address, which are like the main base of the party, of the Socialist Party, they also can't vote. So it gives you some indication that the party was had much more support in the minefields, in the mines of the West, in the timber fields of the South, in the cities, everywhere because the great majority of the actual base of the party wasn't even able to vote, and they still managed to get 1 million votes for socialism. And at the time, like I think the people who win the election get like I don't know, 5 to 7 million votes. Like the uh, very little has actually, and not enough has actually been written about, and even less has been known about just how popular socialism was at one point in the US. So for a long time, there's this idea that the Socialist Party is going to come to replace, it's going to come to basically step into being part of the two-party system. In fact, in a lot of elections, the only reason why the socialist does not win in like a city, like for a city council or for mayor or for governor, is because of fusion between the Republican and Democratic parties. So the two pro-capitalist parties have to unite to keep the Workers' Party, the Socialist Party, from office, from power. And so a lot of socialists think of this like, oh, obviously our time is just over the horizon. It's on its way. It's coming. Our movements are becoming more and more popular all the time, and that also happens to be a major. It's a big part of what ultimately is socialism's downfall, because in 1892, Bart Weaver of the Populist Party, he gets like 5 million votes, and by 1900, with the Socialist Party, this idea is that the Populist Party, which is a party of like, it's largely an agrarian party of farmers, that's a party of the past. These are uh, petty bourgeois, small proprietors. These people don't have the future in mind. They are not proletarian, and so they need to become socialists. They need to become like us, and then the future will be in their hands. And so, even though the Republicans and Democrats can unite to keep socialists from office, socialists and populists don't seem to be able to unite, even on a temporary basis. And that's at some point, if I get to it, I have this list of criminal negligence and stupidities and other missed opportunities. And that's the first one: is that socialists and populists don't ever actually meet. Although a lot of former populists become socialists, especially in Oklahoma and a couple of other states like Nebraska. Um, so in some major strikes in the Timber Wars, in the Lawrence Steel Strike, in the Seattle General Strike, in a lot of the post-war strikes, the Socialist Party is sort of positioned to lead the class, to lead the strikes, and to lead a major rebellion of the workers of the United States. But very much like the Working Men's Party, they kind of shy away from it. They kind of shrink from it. But also immediately post-war, they're driven by an internal faction fight because one major event that happens in the world that is having reverberations all over the world is the Russian Revolution. And in 19 so this like 1919, there's a conference of the uh, of the Socialist Party, and I think it's 9 out of the 12 seats on the executive are won by recognizable figures from the left wing faction of the party. So like people like Louis Frena and John Reed and some other ones. So there's this idea that the Socialist Party is going to become a revolutionary party, and there's a lot of talk about what to do about this. And so for the left, it's like, well, we should kick out our right. And for the right, it's like, well, we just lost this election, so we're just going to nullify the election so we don't get kicked out. So while the working class of the United States, I think they're like 300,000 workers, and that's in addition to the whole of Seattle. They're on strike for various reasons. And while this is all going on, the Socialist Party is inwardly focused. This kind of fratricidal factional conflict, which kind of keeps the socialists uh, more than arm's length from leading the struggles. What's really interesting about this is that okay, so when the Socialist Party eventually, because of these faction fights, it splits into three, and all three factions are pro-Bolshevik. They're excited about the Russian Revolution, and they all three apply to join the Communist International. So that's what I would say is the second criminal stupidity that we should mark on our list of historically missed opportunities. The pro-war socialists, they leave the party at the beginning of the war. So the right wing of the party are just not communist. They're still socialists and they're still in favor of a working class seizure power and a workers' government, and they find inspiration in the Russian Revolution. But those are the right wing, and you're supposed to split from the right wing so you can be revolutionary. So um, eventually, the Communist International they convince they kind of force the two communist parties to merge, and they keep the socialists. The people who want to retain the name socialist, they keep them out because they're too right wing, and not just because of the name, but again, these are just details that we would have to spend too much time if we get into. Um, the end result is that there's a socialist party of about 12,000 people, and there's a communist party of roughly about the same, around 12,000 people. But there are 120,000 former party members who just kind of like disappear. They just kind of drift off into the ether. The fratricidal conflict in the post-war years that really does a number on the workers' movement. And in a lot of ways, the Socialist Party just doesn't recover from this. And let's see, well, with 11 minutes, see how much more I can get. I'll go a little bit quicker. In the 1920s,
I'm sure if you go a bit longer than half an hour, that's
yeah, I might go a little bit over.
Yeah.
In the 1920s, Eugene Debs runs for president again, this time from jail because he's sent to jail when he does the Canton speech. It's an anti-war speech, and it's really, really beautiful. It's worth listening to and reading in full if you can find it. I mean, you can find it. It's easy. He gets 1 million more votes for socialism, and that's despite having no endorsement or support from the new Communist Party, which is underground because they're trying to prepare for a Bolshevik style seizure of power because in their minds, the only way to do this is illegally and to be revolutionary and so on. And so I wrote here, impossibilism rears its head again. It's this kind of something of fantastical delusion that there's one right way to do things and the Russians did it, and so we have to do it the same way. And that never happens. It had never happened so much that in the mid 1920s, this Communist International kind of forces the Communist Party of the United States to adopt a bunch of policies which basically make them indistinguishable from the Socialist Party in terms of contesting elections, settling for demands which are somewhat less than revolutionary as a kind of I mean, the term now is a transitional demand. Basically, again, they're indistinguishable. And so there's this conference for progressive political action, which is meant to be a kind of great unifier. And Debs is in favor of this because he sees it as like, okay, fine, we have to have a communist party and we have to have a socialist party. And also there are people who are like farmer labor party and there's various trade unionists. Fine, maybe we're not all going to be in the same party. We can all be in the same coalition, maybe. And he's a big advocate of this. In the 1924 presidential election, Robert La Follette, I think it's La Follette. I never can decide how to say this. I always say La Follette or La Follette. Anyways, he gets 16% of the vote, or 4.8 million votes. So this is a major opportunity for a remarriage of the party and also again of the class because there's a huge amount of trade union support for this. But the communists want to take it over and they can't, so they kind of leave. The socialists want it to be socialist and they can't take it over. So everyone kind of goes off to their own corners. This is 1924. It's the next major missed opportunity. And then of course there's the Great Depression. There's the destruction of life of working class life in the United States. Millions of workers out of work. And also now there's the founding of a new version of the Communist Party without the Trotskyists because they're all kicked out, and this is all downstream of kind of what's happening in the world, and it starts in Russia and it spreads outward. And so now the socialists, there are the communists and there's also the Trotskyists. And during this time, there's some major big strikes. There's a longshore strike in San Francisco and Long Beach. There's the Toledo Autolite strike. There's also a huge, it's called the Teamster Rebellion. It's a major general strike in Minneapolis. These are all led by different kinds of socialists because they never really all meet up again. They're all just thinking, oh, well, history is going to basically be the wind at our back, in our sails, and we're going to be the ones to lead, we're going to carry forward the will of history. So everybody kind of uh, again competes for a mass audience from their own corner. They don't really meet up. And Norman Thomas, so the Socialist Party by this point is basically written out of American revolutionary radical history because now you have the Trotskyists and the communists. But the Socialist Party, led by Norman Thomas at this point, it still gets about almost 900,000 votes. Like almost, they're still a really popular party for a very long time. Basically going into the Second World War. In fact, the Socialist Party doesn't end up disappearing from the scene until after they kick out the Trotskyists, because the Trotskyists joined the Socialist Party. And in order to appease the right of the Socialist Party executive, led by Norman Thomas, they decide we don't want to deal with these Trotskyists because if you've ever dealt with Trotskyists, we can be I say we they, because I'm a former Trotskyist, whatever, can be very annoying because the idea is that we need the right leadership in order to whatever we have to do the right formula, and one part of the winning formula is to have the right leadership because that's what they did in Russia in 1917. So the socialists kick out the Trotskyists and also their entire youth section, and they don't matter again for the rest of history, really. They kind of matter a little bit only in the sense that in the 1970s they split into three, and one of those elements of the split becomes the DSA. But whatever. So I'm going to skip World War II entirely again. And by the time of the Cold War, that's the next major missed opportunity, because after the Second World War ends, there are another series of strikes, but there's also this what we call McCarthyism. This is the Great Red Scare, the loyalty oaths, the blacklist, the use of the Smith Act to throw the leadership of the Communist Party in jail, and there's an aborted attempt to launch a major organizing drive of the unions in the South. It's called Operation Dixie, and that was meant to break the back of Jim Crow, to basically carry forward the based on the goodwill that the unions had preparing for and being loyal patriots during the war. After the war, everybody liked the union. Everybody remembered the union from the Depression. Basically, these are the people, the unions these are the people that kept you alive. And it makes you wonder actually how history might have been if the civil rights movement was based on the labor movement rather than what happened later on. But anti-communism was very, very powerful. So we end up just not having it. It doesn't happen that way. There is no Operation Dixie. And to date, the American South still doesn't have the same union density as was once expected and hoped for in the 1940s. At this point, also the AFL, the American Federation of Labor, and the CIO, which is kind of the more radical industrial unionist federation, they agree on a few things. They agree to kick out all the communists and to merge. So American labor is consolidated, but without any of the fighters, any of the people who might lead your union against anything other than what is already acceptable. It's a major part of what has happened with American labor, and today we're still kind of just suffering from and still trying to deal with the fact that nobody has ever been as good of a labor leader as communists have been. Because of this and because of the McCarthy era, because of the blacklist and the loyalty oaths, the Communist Party goes underground. And then they're decimated by Khrushchev's secret speech in the 1956 Hungarian Revolution. They go from being around 80,000 people in 1947 to about 5,000 people by 1956. They're basically like utterly wiped out. And then even less. I think there might be around 1,000 people by the mid 60s. The Communist Party just doesn't really matter again as a direct result of this. On the other hand, um, I think 1955, there's this kind of meeting of a few non-communist people like Norman Thomas, A.J. Musty, who's a former leader of the Trotskyists, um, Earl Browder, who's a former leader of the communists, because he's been kicked out of the party now. Um, they kind of meet to discuss the need for this new left formation, which doesn't ever happen. But this idea catches on that there's a new left that's needed because we live in a new era. And there's some merit to that because we don't live in the same version of the world as our grandparents did when they were kids. Um, this new left ends up being it's not based on labor in the same way. This new left may be best personified, I guess, by the Students for a Democratic Society. This is a project which is funded by the United Auto Workers, but very crucially and very critically, they're not a project of the United Auto Workers in the same way. This is not a college expression of a working class labor uh, plan, a labor formation. It's an allied formation. And over time, uh, this term left becomes more about what I guess what you believe should happen, what you think is a basically it's a set of ideas rather than the expression of this tangible, the physical things that happen in your life. So by the 1960s, of course, there is a battle of ideas for sure. There's the civil rights era, the civil rights movement. There's the anti-Vietnam War movement. By the 1970s, there's feminist movement. There's the gay rights movement. But crucially, these are not expressions of American labor trying to assert itself in a on the national scene. These are ideas which people can be for or against. It turns out lots of people in the labor unions. Turns out lots of people in the unions are actually of all kinds of different ideas, all kinds of different perspectives. Because of this, a lot of the left of the communist movement starts to think that students are the real radicals, or else um, poor people, especially poor black people, those can be the real revolutionaries. The unions are bought off. These are they're too wedded to the idea of America. That there's this idea that the more institutional you are, the less revolutionary you are, and that's turns out it ends up being basically the politics of the new communist movement are this total separation of labor and socialism, where is that this is accepted now. So for some section of the left, like the Communist Party, which still exists, and the Trotskyist movement, especially in the Socialist Workers' Party, they're still trying to figure out how to remarry the labor movement and socialism together. Whereas for the new communist movement, this separation is no big deal. It's fine. We'll recruit people on the basis of their agreement with revolutionary ideas, no matter which section of society they come from. Um, if I had more time, I would go into a lot of detail about this. I think I'll just say that the late 70s all the way up through the mid to 2016 when Bernie Sanders becomes a presidential candidate. Socialism is more or less subcultural. This is as a matter of affectation. This is a matter of how you feel rather than your material interests as a worker. Um, So the Communist Party stays more or less hidden, even today. They're still just kind of hidden. Of course, you're allowed to be in the Communist Party, but if you if you're active in your union, you almost certainly have met a communist, a member of the Communist Party, especially somebody over the age of like 55. The likelihood that you're going to meet them as a communist, that's a lot less. I mean, that's much less likely because even today, that's just kind of on the down low because that's not important. Because for them, what's most important is uh, working class self-activity, and so there's something admirable about that. But also, they they're lost. I mean, as far as the left is concerned, you don't notice them. The rest of the left is these kind of increasingly insignificant, smaller and smaller splinters, sects. And that's what all the 80s and 90s and the 2000s were just different street protests, activists who were like trying to, and this is where I come from, trying to make a name for yourself by making a big fuss, having a big protest, being on lots of video and so on. 2016 is a watershed moment because it proves that there are actually the audience for socialism, or at least some ideas that can be very directly connected to some conception of socialism. Because the audience is millions of people. Because Bernie Sanders speaks to huge crowds, and like there's no telling how far that went, but it was very popular. So that was a major point of crisis for this kind of socialism as subculture that the sect world, which based on the old Cold War, which has been over for a long time now, they maintain this kind of in my corner and we're going to be the real revolutionaries. And meanwhile, the rest of the working class is paying attention to uh, our ideas. This guy Sanders, he's stolen our ideas. Whatever. Um, anyways, uh, that's when you get the DSA moment. And for a little while, the DSA is very, very popular. So I went to the DSA for a while. Um, but again, just like back in 1876, um, this idea of the labor movement of the working class is over here, and they're very good at doing those things. The socialist movement, the ideas people were over here, and the idea that they should be merged together, they should be married. It's just this is a perspective that I think this is an argument that basically still has to be won. So I wrote not with a bang, but with a whimper. That's the end of my outline says that. It's like, um, ever since the 2020 election, ever since Bernie Sanders is no longer the principal figure of American socialism, but also now all the sects are mostly gone. Socialism today is largely, it seems to be, um, an affectation of individuals. So if you're on Twitter, you might know a lot of socialists who have all kinds of ideas about any number of things. But the number of organized, like in-person meetings of socialists and in-person campaigns of socialists, is probably the lowest amount of them that there has ever been. I'm 40 years old. I first joined the Young Communist League when I was 15. And I'm certain that I've never lived in a time in which there was fewer opportunities to do anything as a socialist. So I guess again, there's so much more here. I think I'm going to shut up with this. I'm just going to say that that's why I think that there's so much that we can learn from you, because what's really needed right now is a kind of real back to basics. Like when the first socialist group in this country was founded in 1869, their purpose was really just A, to meet each other, and B, to promote the ideas of socialism. And that's, I think, where we are today. We have to get back to meeting each other, kind of fostering this kind of basic community. And I would like to make the contention that the Cold War, which has been over now for 30 years, 34 years, uh, is so far behind us that our differences and the different positions we might have about questions of the Cold War should matter to us about as much as the differences we might have about the Crimean War or the Peloponnesian War. These are historical moments. There's something very interesting, something very cool to discuss it about those things at the bar, at the pub. There's no reason to make a political organization on that basis. The only real basis today is the one that we still had before us back in 1869. I guess that's where I'm going to end. Obviously, I think there's going to be lots and lots to revisit, but that's what discussions are for.
Yeah, that's great, Jason. I feel like that thing about socialism becoming subcultural. Like, did you see recently? You know the band The Armed?
I don't think so.
They're like a kind of like pitchfork darling kind of band, but they opened for Bernie Sanders at like a rally he did recently. It's just like I don't know. That just kind of speaks to that same phenomenon a little bit.
I'm writing that down. I want to check them out.
I don't really personally. I don't really get why they're so big, but you know. I just before we go to questions, I guess I'm going to take a little style at this moment and ask my own question. But like I don't know if you've come across this phrase. I don't know if it's common in the states, but certainly I think in other Anglo countries, when we're trying to map on our experience, I guess, which is a more Westminster based system in New Zealand, Australia, and the UK, obviously, and we're looking at the states, and people will say something like, "Well, the Democrats aren't a Labour Party. Obviously, a Labour Party also wasn't a socialist party, but that means that at some point there was opportunity for a Labour Party, a party that was for the working class, to not necessarily for socialism, but for the betterment of the working class against the kind of ravages of capital, to form." Um, and I think you've kind of like discussed a little bit of why that didn't eventuate in the US, but like I don't know if you have any thoughts on that specifically about why there isn't that kind of party now, because it seems to me like the SPA, Socialist Party of America, weren't really a Labour Party like the UK Labour Party or our Labour Party.
Right.
But also like you had this what do you say, impossibilism rears its head again. Like there's this tradition of
Yeah.
impossibilism, but it's kind of interesting because that was definitely, sorry if you can hear our dog, that was definitely an influence here in New Zealand, particularly around the turn of the century with what's called the Red Federation of Labour. A lot of quite radical Labour leaders, and it eventually culminated in a failed, what was basically a lot of people think it was the closest we got to a revolution uh, in the early 1900s, and it was kind of syndicalist led, right? But a lot of them went into and formed the Labour Party after that, which is still radical for the time, I guess, but was obviously a lot more moderate. So I don't know. Do you have any kind of I don't know. Do you have any kind of thoughts in that realm about why that a formation like that never emerged in the US?
I have a few even.
Great.
So like I'm going back to the early days. I would say the blame is half the that of the blame rests with socialists. The other half rests with the non-socialists. So Samuel Gompers, when he was president of the American Federation of Labor, he very explicitly said that he's not in favor of a workers' party, of a labor party. He said that I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican, I'm for labor. But he didn't mean like I'm for a labor party. He meant whichever one of the two parties is going to give us the best deal, that's one we're going to support. And so that was a very early sorry. It was a very early ethic philosophy of the labor movement. And then to counter it, the socialists were split between either people like Daniel De Leon, who would be in favor of a Labor Party. In fact, that's why we had the Socialist Labor Party. But only if everybody was in the Socialist Labor Party and already accepted his vision of socialism, or his understanding of what would be necessary to make Marx's vision come to fruition. And then Eugene Debs and Victor Berger and Morris Hillquit and this generation of socialist leaders just kind of accepted that socialism was to be the political expression of the will of labor, and that the unions were supposed to be the material expression. The Debs spoke of a two-armed labor movement. The left arm, this is the party. The right arm is the unions. And they fight together. I think a better way to think of it would be like this is the brain is the party, and then these are the unions. These are all part of the same body. And to his credit, Debs did change his mind about this once he saw how destructive various combat for ideas might be when the party splits into three, and then 120,000 of the party members just kind of disappear. And Debs says, okay, fine, this is obviously a terrible mistake. And that's where the Conference for Progressive Political Action is like this hoped for kind of, we'll get everybody back together into one, more or less the same political formation. We'll have communists on one side, we'll have socialists over here, whatever. But we can all agree programmatically to like what we're going to accomplish in this election. What are we going to accomplish in this, I don't know, given period? And then from here on out, it's just like successive iterations of the same basic problems of a small group of us. We get some idea that like, oh, we finally have it. We finally have the wind in our sails. And then we can't count on it's the idea of giving up this thing we're proud of. So we let our initial successes get to our heads, and they become reasons to not move on to second and third gears. So we just never move past our first. We never break out. Is really what I mean. And that happens over and over and over again, all throughout the last century and a half. That American socialism never becomes hegemonic, because once it becomes prominent, the idea of, I don't know, watering down whatever, the thing that you're most proud of, it's just too much to stomach. And so it really takes Bernie Sanders. It takes socialism basically becoming more or less extinct. And then it's like a version of it coming from outside of the socialist movement, so to speak, before it becomes popular. Because socialists have been a major part of the what do I want to say here? A major reason why there is no socialism in the United States today is socialists.
Great. Yeah, thank you. We got a hand up from Karen. Karen, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I enjoyed your talk, and thanks too for having our little representatives on your podcast. It was a nice bit of promo for us in New Zealand.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, and I was thinking about your comment there at the end of that answer to Angus's question, and also some of the discussion in the podcast featuring Angus and co. Around, I think you said in the podcast as a while ago, since I listened to it, but something along the lines of, you thought the model that we're pursuing with the Federation here is on the one hand kind of exciting, because vis-a-vis your experience in the States, we seem to be ahead in many ways of where similarly minded comrades are in the States. But on the other hand, there is a risk that the kind of low barrier to entry aspect that we've created, that brings people in quite quickly. But then if you don't kind of leverage that into something more than your kind of lecture style or sort of social style affair, it can then kind of just dissipate. And I feel like that kind of resonates with what you just said about American kind of socialism more generally. So yeah, what was the solution based on the historical perspective, because that's definitely, I think, a very relevant question for us at the moment. We've certainly had variations of that discussion over and over again over the last several years. I mean, one solution is what you just said, that you have like a kind of third force, namely someone like Bernie who just steps into the breach and picks up on that kind of latent feeling. But ideally, you would want like people like us who've been thinking about this stuff for a long time to be doing that. So how do we do that?
How do we do this? Do you want to take a couple of questions? Should I just do like respond to each one in kind? I can keep my answers shorter so everyone has time. It's up to you. I'm not a
Yeah, I think just one at a time is probably easiest in this format.
Okay, well, I think what I would suggest is that since, well, I can speak from the experience from the US anyways. I don't exactly know if it's the same, but I have a suspicion it's somewhat similar. That just like in New Zealand today, you can get people together on this basis of this recognized need for something communal and some kind of solidaristic expression that, we say we all agree, we're all of the left, we're all socialists of some kind. But at a certain point, like, yeah, there has to be something material, there has to be something physical, there has to be something that you actually do. That is, uh, how do you move into second gear? I think that's really, really difficult to answer. I think that's really hard to move into this phase, especially if we're trying really hard to not reproduce the sect world that I believe we don't want to. We don't want to we don't want to at all. But I do think this is a necessity for socialism to be a very practical expression of the material needs and the wants of the working class. This is just a thing that cannot be avoided. Um, so I think that there has to be okay, so for one thing, I think the group has to be a place. It has to be an expression of, I don't know, a really good way to formulate this in a very simple way. Okay, so like in the States, you have like, I don't know, I forget again, I don't know precisely if it works the same way in New Zealand, but there's the local Federation of Labor has the local Central Labor Council, and they have events, and I think this is just something that has to become part of our regular calendar. We all have to become, at least in a representative way, fixtures of the events of our local central labor councils. We have to become just recognized as these are the people that you have to get in touch with if you want people at your picket line or whatever, your Labor Day barbecue, so that the gathering of the socialist society is not just a kind of subcultural way for like-minded lefties to get together and talk about politics. At a certain point, it has to be seen as where you go to find out what's happening inside the movement, inside of the unions. It also has to be people that you can go to in order to get help um, when it comes to like trying to form a union at work or to find I don't know, legal help or advice. There has to be something that attracts people to the socialist societies, socialist movement that is, I think, on a higher order. It's more significant than uh, socialist theory, even if seems less so. It's that there's this practical need is just this practical expression is just kind of missing. It's this thing we always theorize. Eventually, at some point, we'll do it. I think the way that we do it is by just doing it. We just have to actually just find ways to make what we're doing increasingly uh, directly related to what you do at work.
Yeah, that's great. I think there's a lot there for us to think about. And it's like, build it and they will come, right?
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
suppose there's also in the negative is what you said earlier too, before I asked that question, of not clinging rigidly to kind of fairly hypothetical formulas that you've created in your head of how things should be done. You have to kind of dynamically, flexibly kind of change as you grow and become more connected to, trade unions and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For better or for worse, that they are our audience. They are part of us.
Great. I think the next hand I saw up was Gareth.
Hello. Well, Jason, unfortunately, I feel that you've really shown your true colors today when you say that we're not supposed to have a line on the Peloponnesian War. That is exactly what some kind of neo-Athenian social fascist revisionist would say. My question, I've kind of got two, 1.5 questions. One of them's kind of a fake question. The fake question
I
is,
love those.
are there particular books that you would recommend, like that are kind of just survey histories of socialist American history that you think are useful? And the second question, and this is maybe even more of a fake question, but DSA had, like, I think the thick end of 100,000 members in 2016.
Mhm.
What's your read on what happened there? Because, like, that was the thing that and so I say this as an American who's lived in New Zealand most of my life, so I don't keep my finger on the pulse, but it seems like there's been that was a real fuck up. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, despite having been found out, I'm not going to run away just yet. I'm just going to have to, I'll stick it out. Gesturing toward my bookshelf over here, because for some reason in my mind, I'm thinking like, this is what you should read, but you can't see it. So I think there's a book by Mark Nason called Communists in Harlem During the Great Depression. And I think that's a really critical survey of what the Communist Party did to become a mass party. And it's like it's very focused. It's a very It's a very distinct. What do you call it? It's a case study in precisely that kind of what makes socialism become practical for people. Another book in that same vein is a Hammer and Hoe, which is about Alabama communists during the Great Depression. Just the flip side, it's organizing sharecroppers rather than tenants unions. In terms of a very just broad history, Ira Kipnis wrote a book called The American Socialist Movement, which is really, really good. It starts in, like, I want to say 1870s, but it only goes basically goes to the First World War. And I think there's much more. Like, there's a book called, hang on, I have to look for a second. It's by Maurice Isserman. It's called If I Had a Hammer. And it's just the different sections of different chunks of time, different authors. Like, there's no single author that has written, at least as far as I know, a really good comprehensive history on the whole scope of American socialism. But I could, I don't know, send a list. I could send an email list to the email that I got the invite for this meeting for afterward. If you want like a really detailed list of books to read, but otherwise, I would say those are the main ones. Then I think what happened with DSA is, okay, so at one point there were 85, 90,000 members of the DSA. Nowadays, I would be shocked if it was 20,000. And also, when I say members, to be a member, all you have to do is, like, everyone can become a member of DSA right now. Like, but by the time I finish this sentence, if you wanted to, you could all just get online and make a one-time payment, and you would all be members. Which means I don't actually know how significant the organization actually is in terms of what kind of weight it has. And I think that what happened is that the group never moved into second gear. There was never any attempt to make membership in the DSA mean more than just signing up. And then if you wanted to come to a meeting once a month, and if not, that's okay. So basically, joining the DSA and being a member of the DSA just it doesn't mean anything. It never did mean anything. It never really meant anything more than just this very first gear, like, okay, I'm a socialist, now what? But the now what never came. There was no there aren't even the group's not even organized on a neighborhood basis. It's like a single city. So like when I lived in Los Angeles from like 20 whatever, I lived there for 7 years. The group only had one citywide chapter the whole time. In LA County is like 11 million people. And so you have to drive sometimes like an hour to get to the meeting that happens once a month. And then you're lucky if you can speak 15 minutes in total as an individual. So just being a member of a group of that size, it never became more complex as a group. So it became very frustrating to be a member. So I'm not a member anymore. I can't speak for anybody else, but I could certainly imagine why a lot fewer people are members now than there were 5, 7, 10 years ago. Also, apparently somebody's talking in the chat and I'm not looking at it, so raise your hands, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, it's not really related to the question being asked.
Okay, great.
Sorry, just a supplementary point. That Mark Nason, he was the white African American studies lecturer who was on that one episode of the Chappelle Show, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, because
Yeah, we're
I
Facebook
listened
friends.
I listened to the Brianna Joy Gray interview that she did with him, which was a very good interview.
Yeah, he's not a communist, but he's, very knowledgeable about a lot of things, and he's a good guy,
Great. Tyler?
Yo, long-time listener of the show, and I've never had a chance to say that to someone before. One thing I'm curious about is, I guess, a bit of comparative experience between the states, or at least the part of the states you're familiar with, because I understand it's a huge country, and New Zealand. I've found here, having spent the better part of the last 12-ish years on the kind of socialist left, that a big problem that led to me joining and becoming a pretty dead set supporter of the socialist society here has been anti-intellectualism on the left, and this huge discrepancy between what exists in terms of kind of like a radical intelligentsia in New Zealand, which is very small, but there are some people here and there, and it does exist, and the kind of bulk of the socialist movement, which I always took to be way too focused on just kind of what you were talking about when you were discussing kind of the post-new left socialists, the kind of like the street circuit, always being at demonstrations and not really having much time for anything else. And I'm curious to know, because the US has, a much larger body of people that can contribute to the intellectual life of the left, just by nature of being one of the world's biggest countries. Is there still in the States, like, is the organization, is that reminiscent of the kind of experience you've had with the organizational life of the left? This kind of immense disconnect between the desire to learn and contribute through kind of, intelligent discussion to the left, and the desire to kind of do something now.
So the short answer is yes.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah, it really is. But the longer answer is complex. So for a couple of years, I was actually a staffer. I was a part of the organizing committee and a part of the national leadership of, at the time, the socialist activist group in the States, the ISO. I think in New Zealand you have a whatever, some kind of a sister organization. It's like but I don't know what they're called. And that group was very, very kind of a merger of the two. Sorry, I have a, hold on one second. The anti-intellectualism was not on display in that group, but it was a different kind of anti-intellectualism. There was a very sectarian approach to the idea of intellectual study. So like intellectual intake and outgrowth, that would be it's very encouraged up to a point, as long as you didn't stray too far outside of the line of the party line, whatever. But since the DSA moment, since the Bernie Sanders moment, there has been a deep hostility to what they call theory bros, people who are overly intellectual and don't do anything. And then also now, it seems like there's also a hostility to doing things as well. So I at this point, an overly intellectual approach seems like a good thing compared to what we have now, which, as far as I can tell, is nothing. But being a part of the socialist movement for so many years, I found it very difficult to swim in those waters because all of a sudden I was a member of the DSA and I was very happy about it. Everybody was a socialist. But nobody wanted to learn anything more about it other than just that they were like, okay, I am a socialist. Now what do I do? But nobody wanted to learn anything more than that. And I kind of think you can only get so far with that. Just like I kind of think you can only get so far with, I know everything that there is to know about the Russian Revolution. I know everything that there is to know about the German Revolution, about the degrees of separation between different factions of social democracy in 1896 or whatever. At a certain point, that becomes becomes a reason to not do. So it's very difficult to figure out how to balance these two things. In the States today, I think we don't have either one of them. So yeah, it's like what you said, only it's worse, I think.
Okay. Yeah, we do have in New Zealand there's the ISONZ, which we have an ex-member of in the chat, but I don't know if he was super keen to talk about it or not. Sorry for highlighting you, Andrew. But yeah, no, that does, yeah, it rings very much true of my experience here and what drew me to this group, and also kind of what drew me to your podcast, to be honest. But yeah, thanks.
There's an episode in history that I think should be much more famous in left circles than I think that it is. It's that in 1991, when Boris Yeltsin declares that the Soviet Union no longer exists. What's his name? Ernest Mandel. He gets on the phone. He calls Tony Cliff. These are basically they represent kind of the different warring wings of the warring factions of Trotskyism. Yeah, they have different understandings of what the Stalinist bureaucracy or whatever is. Anyway, so Mandel calls Cliff and he says, at this point, I think it's really clear that our differences of opinion about what to do about the Soviet Union, it's null and void, doesn't matter. This is a moot point. We should get the whole family back together again. We'll start with just merging the Trotskyists. We have community conferences. And eventually, we should reach out to all the former communists, all the people in the world who still want socialism. We need to refound socialism on a new basis. And Tony Cliff says, go fuck yourself, and then hangs up the phone. And I think that says all it needs to say about what's wrong with the left. That has been the issue ever since De Leon's time, and it's still the issue even today.
Yeah. Sad. Oh, Andrew, you there?
Yeah, kia ora. Yeah, so I was a member of ISO for 20 odd years. And it's interesting, because I joined in the 80s, in the 90s, early 90s, which was just after the high point of Tony Cliff's party when it had about 10,000 members in the UK. And like they were really good at producing, like you were saying, like interesting ideas, so long as you didn't stray too far. So really great introductions to socialism, arguments for revolutionary socialism, like really great like way of phrasing Marxist ideas in ways that were relevant to working class experience. But then, yeah, like it seems that at the end of the Cold War, they were really expecting a breakthrough that never happened. And I think that that question of the breakthrough is quite important because we've had a quarter of a century now of the 21st century, and it's been a period of massive mobilizations, but of no organizational growth. So the DSA just followed like a typical pattern of like an explosion and then like a withering away. And that's whether you look at Occupy or Arab Spring or Me Too or Black Lives Matter. And partly like you'd say, well, it's obviously the ability of the internet to organize that, like, you know, Tony Cliff put it best, like he set up like a rocket down like a stick. So yeah, that's sort of, that's an interesting kind of, you know, part of the environment that we're working in. And the other thing is that, like in terms of our group, Federation of Socialist Societies, I do wonder about like the relationship between theory and practice, and that like I get that like the ISO is too narrow an organization, and I left it because it was I thought unable to like break out of like move into second gear. But then at the same time, I'm doing some work at the moment for a fast food workers union here. And if I need help from activists, there's not much point in asking Otago Socialist Society, unfortunately. It's ISO that has the activists. So the ISO is the group of students on campus who will like, you know, put together posters and post to campus and have a little rally that means that the fast food workers from McDonald's can turn up and like make some links with students. So those are all interesting aspects, I think.
I mean, I think what I would say about that is that just because I'm not a member of the ISO anymore, or that grouping that doesn't even exist in the US anymore, it doesn't mean I don't think that there's a role for the student protest, street activist, street protest version of how to do things. I just don't think that that's. I mean, I'm 40 years old. My life has nothing to do with the campus anymore. It hasn't for a very long, long time. And it did at one point. When I was 19, it really mattered that I could go to the meeting of other 19-year-olds and talk about, you know, what we can learn from Trotsky's methods or whatever. And it did help me, you know, these are the people that brought me to my first picket line. A union on strike, up to that point, was just an abstraction to me. The ISO helped make it real. It really, really, really mattered. But then at a certain point, when I was like 30 years old, and I was like, I don't want to go to the campus anymore. I want to, you know, there are people in my neighborhood. We want to organize around utility hikes. I want to organize around evictions. Not to mention, I am a state employee. I'm a member of a trade union. I want to organize my coworkers against job cuts. I want to organize for better retirement. And I also want this socialist meeting to be welcoming to people from my neighborhood, from my workplace. I want to be able to bring this all together. Not that I want to make membership in the group a condition for being welcome at the meeting. And ultimately, I had to just say goodbye to the socialist meeting so that I could go and try to find ways to talk to my coworkers and to my neighbors about their material concerns. Because for some reason, even though the socialists, they might have like nominally better ideas, it didn't matter. In every single case, I found it easier to talk to my coworkers who, whatever, they have all kinds of backward ideas, but they were actually involved. They were actually interested in something that would be tangible and practical. So I mean, I do think I know the answer, sort of, but I think it's a different, very long presentation just to get started. But I don't think that the world of the street activist is entirely separate from what we need. I just think that what we need is not to be found in that world. I think that, like you said, there are ways in which you can bring those people to support this cause. But I think that any of us who aren't students, we have to have a different relationship to the class, and I think that that means in a lot of ways we're going to be trying to figure things out from scratch. We're going to be making up the model for the next generation of socialists.
Thanks, Andrew, as well for your insights there. I don't have my knowledge of Trotskyism is like sketchy. It's kind of like you find a band and you're like, oh, this is a cool song, and then you look them up and they've got a huge back catalog, and you're like, where do I even start with this? Hey, Jason, how are you doing for time?
Oh, I've got time. I'm all right.
Okay, cool. So we got Tom's got their hand up. You wanna?
Yeah, hi Jason. Quite a brief one from me. I was curious if you know much about or have much of an opinion about the Independent Labour Club that seems to be getting started in a couple of cities in the United States. I wondered if from a distance, it looks a little bit similar to what we're doing, which is quite interesting. Might be a spoiler alert because I believe we're trying to line up one of these sort of seminars with Sean actually later in the year to find out about it. But I'm curious to see what you sort of think. But also, thank you for the talk. Thanks for the podcast. I listen to mostly comedy podcasts now. I just don't want to listen to political podcasts, but I still listen to Regrettable Century. So yeah.
I always think it's really incredible whenever I meet somebody or when I talk to somebody and they listen to the podcast. It's like a surprise. I'm aware in this very abstract way that we have listeners. But it's really cool to find when I talk to them, like, oh, that's a listener. Wow, that's a real. They're not just a number on the Buzzsprout. So I very much appreciate that. I don't think I couldn't really provide too much of a spoiler. I think that Sean is going to be way more informative about the independent labor clubs than I can be. For one, because I live in South Texas, which is about as close to the kind of epicenters of the independent labor activities as, I don't know, like Antarctica is to New Zealand, or something. I can't think of it's like maybe like the far northwestern corner of Australia is maybe about the same. It's what I guess what all I'm really trying to say is I'm very far away. I'm very far removed. I'm very supportive. I'm very hopeful about it, but I don't have any practical connection to it. What they're doing right now. Another reason is this last year has really only been the first kind of normal year of my life since I was in a very severe car accident. I kind of died for a little while, and then I got over it, better now, and now I'm looking around trying to find things to do, very slowly trying to find ways to reincorporate real life into my life, and so I'm very hopeful about what can be done. But I think right now I'm just not very connected to what they're doing. So actually, you probably know about as much as I do, although I do talk to Sean often.
I'm just wondering because there's a little bit of a side chat going on in the chat about the Green Party in New Zealand and socialists' relationship to the Green Party. I wonder if you have anything to say about the Green Party USA. It's here. We would talk about them kind of coming out of quite a different tradition, but there definitely are a number of people who call themselves socialists in the Green Party in New Zealand, and there's what they call the Green Left network, I think. I don't know if you have anything to say about the Green Party.
I have a few things to say even. So the first thing I want to say is I worked on a Green Party campaign for a little while in 2016 when it was very clear that it was going to be Clinton and Trump. So I was like, well, since there's no more Bernie work to do. What else is there? And ended up getting hired as the Texas kind of campaign organizer for the Jill Stein campaign. So I met a lot of these people, and a lot of people are former SWP members or otherwise socialist in ethics or in kind of in an ideal sense. And also, the Green Party was actually founded in part by Peter Camejo, who at one point was like the most recognizable Trotskyist. Like I think Camejo in 1976, he got like 92,000 votes, which is not a lot compared to like, you know, a million for Debs, and like I think like 4 million when Wallace ran on the Progressive / Labor Party ticket in 1948. But nevertheless, in 1970 or 76 or 72, I forget, whatever year was it that election happened, Camejo was popular enough to where even Lyndon Johnson had to have comments about Trotskyism, that he had to he had to say things because it's like, oh, this is happening because this is the early 70s, just like on the heels of a radicalization in the U.S. And so when Camejo, I don't remember if he gets kicked out or if he just leaves. Whenever he leaves the SWP, he he's one of the people that founds the Green Party, and he's Ralph Nader's running mate in 2000. And that campaign, I think they get like 4.2% of the vote or something, like almost enough for the Green Party to qualify for federal funds, which would make them an actual third party in the US for a little while, but only for that one election. But the Green Party at one point was kind of something to be very serious about, and there was a lot of hope placed in those possibilities. But I would also say that based on my own experience inside the Green Party, I do not share those hopes.
Yeah, great, thank you. Yeah, that's interesting. I guess I don't know. I'm sure other people here, maybe Tyler, have a bit more knowledge, but that's interesting what you say about them. I think I had read that they kind of had that background in the Trotskyist movement. That's not really the case with the Green Party here. They're more, I guess, from that kind of whole other tradition of, I don't know what you want to call it, left kind of, new social movements and that kind of thing.
Well, yeah, like in 2000 when Nader ran, like what happened right before that was the Seattle, the battle for Seattle in 99. The U.S. Labor Party founded in 96. There was a big UPS strike in 95. Like that was a high point. And then of course 9/11 happens, and ever since then nobody cares, or very few people care about the Green Party.
Yeah, Tyler, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I'd be happy to speak just a little bit to the early Green Party here, if that was of interest. Yeah, okay.
I would say yes.
Yeah, well, I think the big difference would be, so before the NZ Green Party, which was founded about 1990-ish, there was the Values Party, which was supposedly, according to party law, I don't know if this is quite true, the first ecological party in the world. So kind of the first Green Party. And the old Values Party they very famously had a manifesto, which I forget the name of, but called for zero economic growth and zero population growth. And the retort to that in later days has been, well, COVID achieved both. And the Values Party stuck around for a while. It was very middle class social base, and it wasn't super connected to the organized left, who mostly still either ran independent campaigns or supported the Labour Party. And when I think the interesting thing is that when the Green Party was founded in 1990, a lot of people who had been involved in, Michael's made the point that they had a whole neither left nor right, but forward was one of their slogans. Yeah. So in the 1990s, though, and since then, there has been quite a lot of people who have gone through the Green Party who had a serious background in kind of radical left-wing street politics. One MP, Sue Bradford, very famously a former Maoist in the 1980s, and a very key figure in the unemployed movement that we had here in the late 80s and early to mid 90s. And another MP who would actually be co-leader of the party for a while, were Materia Ture. She was an anarchist in the 90s. So the kind of old background of the Greens here is very kind of distinctly middle class, kind of ecology only focus, and kind of interested in Malthusian economics for good or ill. But when it was founded as the Green Party, there's been since then a lot more of that connection to kind of the socialist activist base. That's as I understand it anyway.
I might have questions about a lot of possibilities, what can be done about these sorts of things, but I don't even know how to formulate them in any kind of succinct, educated way at the moment. But the fact that the U.S. doesn't have a parliamentary system means that I'm always really curious, and I'm never quite sure how what I imagine to be the kind of practical concerns and possibilities in your minds. I don't know if they actually exist in the same way that I imagine them to exist.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure other people can weigh in, but I guess in some ways it's probably, the task is somewhat easier because the barrier to formal politics in New Zealand, to high politics, is so much lower. I think, as someone said in the chat, like the Greens have 15 odd MPs in our parliament. Which I don't know if the Greens have. Like, I'm sure they have like councillors and stuff like that in cities in the US, right? I imagine.
Counselors. Oh, yeah. For some reason in the U.S. we don't say that word. I don't know why we don't. We say like council member, but whatever.
Right.
Surely there must be, but I don't know of any.
Yeah.
I imagine there must be somewhere, but also like city councils, those are, generally speaking, those are nonpartisan races.
Okay.
And so you either have conservative or liberal, and when they say liberal, you could mean the kind of any number of things which are like nominally left or nominally whatever. It's like it's very hard to tell, but also like I think I don't want to say anything too disparaging and too dismissive of the Green Party, but
yeah, I mean, well, that
I
even
shouldn't
maybe
talk about it too much.
that even may be a kind of a difference, I think, because my observation is that local politics here in New Zealand is becoming more partisan, and whereas before you probably did have that kind of not really declared allegiance, but using signifiers, people could kind of guess where someone sat. Now we have a lot more parties running candidates. And I think the what's called the ACT Party here, which is our kind of free market libertarian party, although they, as a lot of these parties do, veer into quite heavy-handed tactics when it comes to law and order. They're going to be running candidates now, apparently, or they're going to allow candidates to run. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on this. I'm just kind of riffing here. But does anyone else have any questions as well? Otherwise, maybe this is a good point to wrap up for our afternoon. I don't know what time. What time is it for you?
It is 9:13 p.m.
Cool. Not too bad. I know if Hayden
Yeah,
was going
not
to
too
host, if Hayden was going to host this, it was going to be 2:30 a.m. his time.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right. Because I forget. He's not actually in New Zealand right now.
Yeah. Andrew, you've turned your camera on.
Just to say goodbye. Thank you very much, Jason. Really great too, and thank you, organisers, for setting this up. All the
Cheers,
best,
Andrew.
everybody.
All the best. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for showing up.
Thank you. Maybe we should leave it there then, unless anyone has any burning last minute questions. No. Great. Okay. Well, oh, Jason, I guess, do you have anything to plug? Would be the last thing.
Oh, I probably should. if I was thinking about this ahead of time, I probably would have. No, I think so yeah, like I said, there are two, there's actually really three podcast episodes that we did about this, that kind of take this truncated, I don't know, whatever presentation they did, and kind of fleshes them out a little bit. There's a tragedy of American socialism, there's the farce of American socialism, and then there's the death of the left, and that's like a spiritual third part. And I would recommend, if this is of interest to you, just because there's so many details about all kinds of, I think, really interesting things, but also a lot of that stuff didn't even make it into the recording because it's being pressed for time means you have to cut out a lot, and so at some point I would again, if I had thought about this, I would have something to plug, but eventually I want to find something to do with this text. Other than that, oh, you know what's funny? I do have something to plug. It's just not quite launched yet. But on April 1st, which is Tuesday, there's actually going to be a new podcast. It's a history of the Soviet Union by decade. And it's like every episode it's like me and my friend Matthew, and every episode is exhaustively researched, and it's way more pedantic and way nerdier even than this. And when I say even than this, I mean the text form. But I would say, yeah, Unbreakable Union is the name of the podcast, but it doesn't even exist yet. So I guess I don't really have anything to plug.
Unbreakable Union. As I read, there's a line in the national anthem, right, which was Stalin changed from, I can't remember what it was. I'm just reading at the moment that Yurchek, everything was, I can't remember what it's called now, but it's like, he's a sociologist. Everything was, I don't know, the premise of the book is that no one in the last Soviet generation could like foresaw it ending, but when it ended, they were like, oh, it was obvious.
Yeah, like after the fact, it's like the most obvious thing in the world, even though nobody expected it, and also like nobody voted for it. I think, other than like in the Baltic countries, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, which were incorporated into the Union by invasion. So fair enough, you didn't want to join. But all the other constituent republics voted with like a plurality against dissolution. So the decision to close the Soviet Union was made in Moscow by a handful of bureaucrats, for democracy or whatever.
It's a fun name for the podcast, Jason. I always thought the line "Unbreakable Union of Freeborn Republics" was quite good because it's like, well, wrong on basically every point.
Yes, it's a nice thought. It's a very wonderful sentiment. It's aspirational, and it turns out to be entirely incorrect. But yeah, look out for that. And I guess I will just say, I don't know, if you listen to the Regrettable Century, we're gonna post an episode about that. And if you don't, listen to the Regrettable Century.
Indeed. All right, that's great. And yeah, I think we should all definitely keep in touch about. Obviously, you said you got a bit of a diagram, and just the article in general. Like we'd be, we'd love to publish that. I think speaking, maybe I'm speaking unilaterally, but I can do that. I'm hosting. So sorry, you're going to say something?
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
And I just opened Tyler's message. It's a document, just like very much like the one I was talking about, except for mine's hand drawn and uglier than this.
Oh,
I have to
shucks.
sign it. I have to sign into Lumen PDF. I'll look at this later. For now, I'll just say awesome. Thank you.
Brilliant. All right. Well, thank you very much, Jason, and thanks everyone for joining. Take care.
Yeah. Thanks for hosting.
No
Bye,
worries.
everybody.
Bye.
I think I just have waved at all of the messages. Okay. And for those who have not sent messages, I'm just doing this.
All right. I will end the meeting so we can do all that.
Yeah.
Bye.